Well, I self-massage for 10 or 15 minutes a day, and I don't necessarily see much of improvement over time.
Welcome to Strength and Scotch, the show where health, fitness, and alcoholism come together. So pour a couple fingers, throw a barbell on your back, and listen closely.
Welcome to Strength and Scotch. I'm Grant, and here with me as always is Coach Brandon Heavey. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing really well, Grant. How are you?
I am super, and I am super excited to introduce Shane Dowd of GotRom.com to Strength and Scotch today. Hey, Shane, how are you?
What's happening? How are you?
Very well. Thanks a lot for joining us today. We're going to get into your website and your expertise a little later about range of motion and how important being stretchy is. But before we get into the episode, I want to talk about another very important stretchiness, which is stateandliberty.com shirts. They are our proud sponsors, and we appreciate them, and we hope you guys go check out their shirts to look professional and sexy. Stateandliberty.com, whole new business line of stretchy, wickable, amazing shirts that make even Brandon look good.
It's tough to do, trust me.
All right, guys. So I don't know if you guys have seen this. Are you familiar with who Bob Harper is?
Yeah, he's one of the biggest loser trainers.
Right, exactly.
Yep.
So you know the name. Did you hear that he had a heart attack?
I did hear about that. I didn't get the details. That was like maybe a year ago or something, right?
That's right. Actually, not quite. It was February.
Okay.
And he's a younger dude, right? Maybe like our age, mid-30s, maybe a little bit older, but in incredibly good shape. Makes a point to train, to eat well, range of motion, all that stuff. And he had this heart attack, which sucks, obviously. But he said it was in his family and he had genetics and all this that kind of took it out of his hands, right? No markers. There was no warning. It just happened. But now that he's healthy, this article came out that said that he has decided, because of the heart attack, to completely go 100% vegetarian and cut out all meat eating and meat products from his life. I'm sorry, I said vegetarian. I meant vegan. My question, so that's the news article, and I thought that was interesting because I thought that we had all, as a scientific community, decided that there was not harm in eating meat for our hearts. What do you guys think about his decision there?
Well, I can tell you that there's a couple things, right? So first of all, I think when we talk about heart concerns in meat, the few elements that people throw out there are dietary cholesterol and saturated fats, right? And so this past year, dietary cholesterol was stricken from the restricted list of items from the American Heart Association's, like, watch out for this, type of list. But they still do make recommendations on saturated fat content and recommend that you limit it. Now, the research that I have seen would call many of those recommendations into question, but the meat thing is pretty interesting because you have people that kind of want to swing one side of the pendulum or the other, and there still are issues with meat, but as far as I understand and have read, it's largely connected with processed meat. So, if you're eating mostly like, if every piece of meat you're not eating is a hot dog or even bacon, like, if that's not all the meat you're consuming, then you're probably fine. At least that's my take on the research.
I would kind of agree with that. I think the one thing that all these studies and kind of the general public opinion is often missing is the overall context of a person's diet, meaning it's rarely like just red meat is bad or rarely milk is bad or eggs are bad or this one specific food is bad, but people who eat a certain pattern of in a certain patterned way, like they're eating red meat, yes, but they're also eating a lot of processed foods, a lot of simple carbs, too many calories overall, and it doesn't sound like this is this guy's particular issue, but that's just my own little contribution, is that often the public wants to demonize just one specific food like red meat or one specific element of food like cholesterol or something, without looking at the person's overall diet. Like I would question, is a person at risk of heart disease if they're eating red meat, but a lot of poly and monounsaturated fats and not too many calories and lots of vegetables and stuff like that? Or is that person at risk of heart disease just because they're eating meat? I would say probably not.
Yeah, I think you kind of raised the interesting point here of something known as the healthy user bias, which pops up in a lot of research and is why we see all these articles that show that, that quote unquote show that meat is bad for you, is because as a society, we've been projecting that meat is bad for you for so long. So the people that take their health seriously tend to gravitate toward more plant-based diets. So the people that aren't taking their health very seriously, that are still focused on meat, are also the people that are drinking excessively and smoking and not exercising. And so you can't, I mean, that greatly skews the research. And if we can't, like Shane said, we can't just pick one thing and then try to connect it to a cause. That's just not how any of that research works.
Brandon, I feel like you're giving me conflicting messages, because you tell me how important sleep and stress is, but then you say that I have to exercise and eat well and can't drink and shouldn't smoke. I can't do it all. This is my problem. But what I thought was interesting, Shane, about your answer was that you were kind of taking a holistic approach to the question of, is Bob Harper focused on the right thing? And it's really, it's not maybe the meat element. It's everything together. You can't just pinpoint one part. And I find it interesting that came from you because of the nature of your website. When I think of fitness and, people, athletes, quote unquote, these days, very rarely do you see anyone that isn't just a yoga fanatic really focused on range of motion. So and I'm assuming that this mentality you have with the food, taking that holistic approach, is how you got into this range of motion issue. And I'm wondering if you could give us a little bit of backstory on GotRom.com.
Yeah, well, it was actually kind of similar to what we were just talking about. I kind of had a quote unquote heart attack of sorts, but with my physical body, and it put me in enough pain. What happened was at the time I was working in a CrossFit gym. I was teaching Olympic lifting classes and doing personal training and strength and conditioning and stuff like that. So I was doing a lot of heavy lifting, and I ended up doing a light power clean. It wasn't even heavy, and I have it on video, and the technique was fine and stuff like that, but I ended up injuring myself, and it led me down this rabbit hole of how the heck can you lift with perfect form? You have it on video, and it's light, and you still get hurt really bad. And it led me into, alignment and posture and mobility. I found Kelly Starrett, who started to really popularize mobility. I got into yoga. I started looking for different therapists and teachers and stuff like that. So basically it was pain that brought me to mobility, and pain that brought me to doing something different.
Do you still do CrossFit?
I don't do CrossFit anymore. I taught and worked. I didn't teach CrossFit, but I taught their Olympic lifting classes, and eventually I taught their mobility classes at that gym, and I was a massage therapist and a personal trainer at that gym.
I'm curious, Shane. So you came to mobility through this pain that you had and resolving that. Most people, well, I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people that try to address mobility and flexibility issues, that they see Kelly Starrett's videos, and there's a different thing, a different technique coming at them every single day, and I think people can get overwhelmed, and they don't end up taking it seriously. They never end up taking it to see progress within it. So is it possible for an everyday person that works behind a desk, that works out a few days a week, to actually, not spend 4 hours a day on mobility, see results from it in a relatively short time? And how do we do that?
Totally, yeah. I agree with you completely that it can be overwhelming if you just start. You're like, okay, I've got some pain in my body and I want to get rid of it, or I want to get a little bit more flexible, or my CrossFit coach is telling me my mobility sucks and I need to do something about it. And you start to kind of learn what to do. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of videos out there. And that was one of my main kind of frustrations, is that there's just so much information. It's the information age that we live in. that you just kind of throw up your hands and you're not even going to start because there's just so much. And so, I was looking at who is teaching mobility out there and how are they teaching it. Like Kelly Starrettis, he's a legend. The guy's amazing. But he puts out so much content, like every day. It's like a new video and stuff like that. And he's refined it and he's put it in books and different seminars and stuff like that. So you can get it in a more condensed version. But what I tried to do in the teaching of it was to pick a specific topic and put not as many things as I could find. Like, let's say you want to improve your squat mobility. I have a program about squat mobility. Or you have back pain. I have a program just about back pain. So it's not like, it's very specific to the thing that you're worried about. Usually people know what their issue is.
I noticed that on your website, and you have quite a few programs, and it does seem like you address all the issues people may have, particularly athletes. And I guess my question is, for what reason do you think that's a better approach than a full body sort of mobility thing, like a yoga practice or whatever?
I think you can do both. If you just want to generally kind of hit all of the important things and just kind of generally loosen your body up, then go do some yoga classes or go do maybe your CrossFit box has ROMWOD or maybe, there's so many different things that you can do if you want, just kind of like a generic, meant for everyone kind of protocol to follow. But then there's some people who have a very specific issue that they want fixed. Like maybe they go to do a snatch and they find that their shoulder gets like this pinchy impinge feeling and they want to fix that shoulder. That's when it's a to like get a program specifically about shoulder impingement or about specifically squat mobility. Like there's so much squatting in CrossFit and you just want to like went in and tackle that for a while. Then you get a little more narrow.
I really like that type of approach because I feel like it opens the door for you to see progress rather than the shotgun approach of doing something different and sort of, random every day. Sort of like, I mean, I don't know a lot about ROMWOD. Grant has done ROMWOD. You haven't continued it though, Grant. So I'm kind of curious, why did you fall off doing ROMWOD?
It's a great question. I had a lot of trouble staying motivated for it. It wasn't that it was physically challenging. I mean, the stretching part, was uncomfortable, but it got to the point where I'd come home and I was like, man, I got stuff to do. It never felt quite as important as, say, making time to go for a run or to lift some weights. And I don't know why. I wish I could tell you, Brandon, exactly what it was about ROMWOD or stretching that felt maybe quote unquote less important, but I did find it hard to keep the motivation going.
Well, I mean, that's exactly my point is that, so Shane, I used to own a CrossFit gym, and during that time, I tried a bunch of different ways to get my members, involved in taking their stretching, flexibility, mobility all seriously. And I have to say that I largely struck out most of the time with that. One of the things I tried to do that Grant was a beta tester with is we did this like mobility specific class, and the idea is people would come and do that instead of their workout. And, it's really hard to get people to buy in on that, right? They want to feel like they've done something, they've accomplished something, and they feel that after they lift weights, but they don't really feel that. Most people, I guess, don't really feel that after 30 minutes of stretching. And I think that's why people don't take it seriously. But maybe these like, I'm guessing these programs that you've put together are shorter term in nature. So you can see like, oh, maybe I'll take the next 4 weeks to address my squat and actually have some measurable difference in it. And then that will sort of have this snowball effect that will motivate me. I mean, is that kind of the idea behind it?
Exactly. Totally. I mean, if I tell you, I want you to work on something as amorphous and kind of like, you can't hold it in your mind. Like I want you to have better mobility, just better body mobility. Like, what do I really mean by that? Am I talking about just stretching or posture or flat? Like, what does it mean? But if I say, okay, your shoulders are super tight and you can't overhead squat, you're going to take 30 days and just focus on getting your shoulders more mobile. Here's a 30-day program. You just follow it. And then that's it. That's all I want you to work on. Even if you do have to work on all these other things like ankles and hips and stuff like that, if you get real laser focused for those 30 days, you will see progress, and you'll see progress on something you care about. Like, let's say we're talking about a CrossFitter who wants to be able to overhead squat and actually be able to hold the bar overhead all the way down in the squat. After 30 days of diligently working on one thing, they'll see the progress, and then it's in something that they care about. And so that's kind of self-motivating to keep going. But if you're doing that shotgun approach of like everything all day, then you just make a little bit of progress on everything. You're kind of crappy at everything. It's like, do you want to be a champion powerlifter and a champion marathoner and a champion gymnast all at the same time? Right. It's not gonna work. Right. Like, focus on one thing at a time.
It's the CrossFit model, right?
Yeah. Even in CrossFit, when you're trying to develop all these capacities concurrently, you still go through phases where you have like a strength block and, sure. and you know, right.
Yeah. So let's talk about overhead mobility and overhead squat, for example, because that's something that I think a lot of people struggle with. How much time, and I know it's going to vary depending on each person, but you say, as an example, maybe at the end of a month, we can see some measurable differences if we take our mobility very seriously over that time. How much time do we have to devote to it to actually see progress? I mean, is it something like a half hour, a few days a week is going to do the trick, or what?
I can attest that 25 seconds a day is not enough, because when I brush my teeth, I put my leg up on the bathtub to stretch the hammy out, and it doesn't get better day to day.
Still tight, yeah. Well, it really depends on the individual. I mean, if I take you, who have an athletic background and worked in a CrossFit gym and have experience with these movements and probably care a little bit more than average about your range of motion of your body, you're going to be able to make progress a little bit quicker because you probably have better body awareness and you're more motivated, and you're already probably not as super stiff and tight as like, you know, a 50-year-old desk worker. So it depends on what your starting point is. Mm-hmm. If someone comes into the CrossFit gym and they have literally been working at a desk job for 20 years, they're going to have to put in more work to get flexible and mobile, just like period. Right. Goes for anything, strength, endurance, any quality. So it depends on where you're starting, and it depends on how much time and energy you have to commit to it. Okay. And how much pain you're in. If you're in pain, you'll work as many hours as is needed.
Right.
What about those of us who do work desk jobs and maybe are not at the pain level yet, but we want to prevent that? What do you recommend, quote unquote, normal people to do to make sure they don't end up in that position?
Having some kind of a daily practice, even if it's like 5 or 10 minutes, and do it whenever or wherever you'll actually do it consistently. Morning, midday, broken up in 1 minute increments throughout the day. I don't really care, but like some form of stretching plus self-massage plus moving is pretty good for the average desk worker. So if that means, every 30 minutes at your desk job, you get up and move for 3 minutes. In some of my programs, I call it the 33 rule, where you sit for 30 minutes, you get up and just move for 3. You might squat, you might do a couple quick stretches, you might just kind of open up your posture and your neck because you were slumping, and then you just go back to work. And realistically, you accumulate 10 or 15 minutes a day. I guarantee if you do that for 20 years and it's just 10 minutes a day, you're going to feel better than if you were doing nothing and just kind of being like, whatever, I'm not in pain yet.
Well, I self-massage for 10 or 15 minutes a day, and I don't necessarily see much of improvement over time. Though I feel better in the short term.
Don't lie. It's not 10 or 15 minutes.
No, it's 1 or 2. So I guess if I don't lift, if I'm not looking to squat, if I just want to be a healthier person, is 10 or 15 minutes really enough in the long run?
If you're, if you don't have any major injuries and you just want to feel good, like your only kind of aspiration is just to not to be able to move and just go about the same life you've been living, yeah, 10 or 15 minutes is going to be fine. Take your arms overhead and hang from a bar a little bit if you have that option, or do a couple quick yoga poses, or roll on your foam roller for a couple minutes. Like, yeah, are you going to get your middle splits? Are you going to, but those aren't your goals anyway. You just kind of want to feel good. So yeah, something is definitely better than nothing. And I think 10 or 15 minutes is adequate for the person who just cares about feeling good.
I did want to point out there are some pictures of Shane on his website doing the middle splits. So he does walk the walk.
Well, what I kind of set this question up, and I was hoping you were going to say that, because what about the opposite? Our listener who takes their athleticism and training very seriously and does need to really improve on some of these athletic movements, 10 or 15 minutes probably isn't enough for them, right? How much time do you think that sort of advanced level person they were addressing Heavey to earlier, how much do they need to put to their range of motion?
Again, it depends on the person and it depends on their goal. Like if they are a big buff weightlifter and then all of a sudden they wanted to get the middle splits, even though they have the motivation, they have the interest, they've got a lot of built up tightness that's going to take some time to learn how to let their muscles go farther and farther out into the middle splits. So it's kind of like the visual I have in mind is like, if you're running to the top of the mountain, are you starting at the base of the mountain, or are you starting a mile backwards on the path because you've got all these old accumulated injuries and stuff like that? Or are you already halfway up the mountain because you just genetically gifted, or you've got some experience stretching in your background when you did gymnastics when you were a kid? So it's really impossible. I know the mind wants to be like, how many minutes a day like do you need? But it really depends on where you're starting and how far you want to go. So it can be such a spectrum. I used to do mobility work on myself for hours a day because I had this really bad hip issue called femoral acetabular impingement, and I was working to resolve that. And I just got really fascinated by the subject, and I started teaching it. And so I wanted to like go above and beyond what I would expect other people to do. So I was doing hours a day. Nowadays, I literally do 5 to 10 minutes a day, and I can still get my splits. So it's also, once you've built it, it's easier to maintain. So it can vary so much.
What was that condition called again?
Femoral acetabular impingement, FAI, commonly called hip impingement.
And how were you diagnosed with that?
There's some clinical tests that people do where they'll lay you on your back and push your leg up and internally rotate it and other things like that. But I also got an X-ray and an MRI and things like that.
And it took hours a day for you to sort of beat it?
No, it took me, I was investing hours a day in the beginning just because I tend to get obsessed with things. And so I was just doing it partially I was out of pain very quickly within a couple of months. But then I was like, the prevailing wisdom about FAI is that it's a bone problem. And therefore, there's nothing that you can do to outstretch it or out massage or foam roll or do anything like that. It's a bone problem. But I kept getting better and better doing this mobility work on it. And I was like, wait a minute, if it's a bone problem and I'm working on the muscles, why is it getting better? So I just wanted to see how far I could take it. And then so I was out of pain from the FAI within a couple of months. And then I was working on kind of optimizing it over the next several years. And then I got curious, hey, can I do the splits with this so-called bone problem? And so I just I went way, way deep down the rabbit hole.
How much is actually working on the muscles, and how much is your tendons, ligaments, fascia, all that stuff?
I mean, it's not like they're like separate parts. Like fascia blends through muscles and they're connected with, it's all kind of blended together. So if you're doing mobility work, you're smashing parts of your body with a lacrosse ball or a barbell or a foam roller, or you're stretching, you're affecting all of it. It's like, I can't tug on this part of my shirt without affecting the other part of it down here. It's all connected.
So real quick, I want to take us back to the desk worker and see if we can't get a couple specifics here. So you mentioned that the issue with the desk, working behind a desk, is that you are basically not moving for most of the day. And so you're recommending getting up and moving around every so often to, prevent just that hunched over position from really setting in, I suppose. That's about right?
Yep.
Okay. So given that, what are maybe one or two things for somebody that even still is getting up every couple hours or every hour or whatever, that can stretches that they can do, specific stretches that they can do to help them just, I mean, I imagine like, thoracic spine, those sort of areas will be the things that are super tight and wound up on these individuals. So what one or two things that can they do to really help stretch wise?
The two big ones are in your lower body, your hip flexors, because you're stuck in a hip flexed position, which means your hip flexors can never fully lengthen. So the stretching the hip flexors is one of the most important things to do for the lower body as a general rule. And then for the upper body, it's the thoracic spine being too rounded. Right. So getting some thoracic extension, and then also getting the pecs to kind of open up, because kind of when the back rounds, the shoulders also slump and the head juts forward. So it's a combination of thoracic spine, pecs, and neck. So there's like 4 quick stretches that you could do in under 2 minutes for hip flexors, thoracic spine, pecs, and neck that you could do in every day if you're getting up every 30 minutes or so.
And what's the easiest stretch for those hip flexors?
Just dropping down into a kneeling lunge position. And then I've got different videos that are easier to see on YouTube, but you basically drop into a lunge position, do a hard crunch and kind of posterior pelvic tilt. It's kind of like a dog tucking its tail, kind of a dog tucking under, and then lunging forward and letting your leg trail behind you.
And what do you like for the thoracic spine?
Wait, hang on, guys. I'm sorry to interrupt, but what you guys keep using this word thoracic, but I know the word spine. What do you mean when you say thoracic spine?
Thoracic just means kind of the upper spine, the upper back, essentially.
Why don't they just say upper spine?
Because they got to get all fancy on us and just use anatomical.
The hip bone is connected to the leg bone, right?
Yeah, I never heard the part of the song that says it's connected to the thoracic spine bone.
It doesn't.
But did you hear the part that said "suck it, Heavy"? Because that was in there.
Sorry. It was a good question. So, what stretch can we do for that?
When you're all Quasimodo-like, we'll use the simple terms. When you're all hunched and rounded, the easiest one that you see most often is just getting on a foam roller. People are fairly familiar with foam roller these days. So just kind of arching your back. If your back is kind of moving in a slumped, rounded, looking like grandma and grandpa direction, it's basically just moving it in the opposite direction and putting a leverage point in the middle of your back with a foam roller, and just, you can move, you can just breathe and relax, you can put your hands behind your head. Eventually, I usually graduate people beyond that because it kind of loses its efficacy. So I'll put 2 lacrosse balls on their upper back, which gets a lot more targeted and allows you to kind of work on each section of your spine and gives you a better posture benefit once you're ready for it. It's kind of intense in the beginning.
So that foam roller runs down the length of your spine?
Actually, across. If this
across.
Is vertical, it goes horizontal, and you kind of leverage over it. You lean back and drape yourself over it like a wet noodle.
That's funny, because what you said the first time about using the foam roller to open it up, I've heard plenty of times that, and I always thought they wanted it to go down the middle, and I'm like, this never feels right. This isn't good.
Yeah.
So I stopped, and then I poured some scotch.
Well, that's the thing, is often a lot of these exercises are they come out of physical therapy, and they're intended for kind of like the 60-year-old woman who hasn't stretched a day in her life and is literally like a question mark with her upper back, and she's not ready for even turning the foam roller the other way and draping over would be too intense. I've had clients that are elderly like that. And so then when you get a young, healthy guy doing it, it's like, is this even doing anything? Like, it's so beyond beginner level that you get no benefit from it. So I believe that just like your strength training and your cardio has to be progressive, it has to get more intense to give you a fitness benefit. Your stretching and your self-myofascial release, your foam rolling, your self-massage has to become progressive. It has to gradually get more intense.
And speaking of that, what do you think about loaded stretching?
I love it. I have a program about it.
Oh, okay, nice. Because I know that, for instance, I do a handful of stretches. I'm far from an expert on this. But I do a handful of stretches, and I find that I get a great deal of benefit from them. So, for instance, there's the classic weightlifter ankle stretch where you go down to the bottom of the squat, put the barbell across your knees effectively, and then kind of work the corners with your ankle as you shift your knees around. And I find I've got super tight ankles just from rolling them a lot, playing basketball and whatever else. And I find that stretch is super effective for me. Are there any specific loaded stretches that you really find super helpful?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two different types of loaded stretches. There's one where you're just kind of using a weight specifically, like you're holding a barbell and you're doing that ankle stretch, or you're holding a barbell and you go into like a forward fold in yoga and you let the barbell pull you deeper into the hamstring stretch.
Kind of like
in
a
gymnastics.
Jefferson curl sort of thing.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
That's what it's called. Yeah. Jefferson curl. So there's, that's a good one for the hamstrings, but really any stretch can become a loaded stretch if you just know how to add weight to it. And why I like that is basically, when you go into an extremely stretched position, your body kind of starts freaking out. Like it doesn't feel safe. If you're doing like the splits, for example, your body's like, this is not safe. I'm going to rip a muscle here. But if you build strength at that end range, then your body's like, oh, we've been here before. We can handle this. We have strength at this range. This is not a threat. I'm not going to tear a muscle because I have strength here. So literally any stretch, hip flexor, pigeon pose, glute stretches, hamstring stretches, they all can, there's ways of adding weight to them. But what you see the most is the one you just mentioned for the calves, and then the Jefferson curl for the hamstrings. But there's quite a few more too.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely noticed that feeling of the body kind of going into this emergency mode. For instance, there's one where you butterfly your feet together and then, put plates on each of your legs to open up the psoas there, the hips there. And for like the first, I usually hold it for 3 minutes or so, because the first minute is just my body freaking out, not really, right, just fighting the stretch. And then after a minute or so, you can feel things really start to open up. And so that's another one that I really enjoy.
Yeah, the loaded butterfly is a great one. That's one of the reasons that I think that I'm still able to do the splits, even though I only now stretch like 5 or 10 minutes a day, is the loaded stretching, because I've built strength at these end ranges. And so I can fairly quickly drop into these positions, and it's not a threat to my nervous system because it has built that strength over years of kind of training to be strong in those positions.
Got it.
Going to take it real seriously and spend 20 minutes a day on mobility. Is that too little? 30 minutes a day? I thought 5 or 10 was good.
I'd be impressed if you were doing 5 minutes a day, man.
I was putting myself in someone else's shoes, Brandon, because where I was going with the question is, what percentage of the time do I want to split into, stretching, static stretching, deep stretching, etc., and how much of it do I want to put into the massage or lacrosse ball or foam roller kind of work?
The short answer is it's about 50-50 for most people. If you have more old injuries where you've got scar tissue that needs to be broken up, then you might do a little bit more of the tissue work. Because if you tear a muscle or you pull a muscle, it doesn't reform perfectly symmetrically. It kind of reforms like a knotted scar ball. If you try to stretch that, it's like stretching a rope with a knot in the middle. It doesn't stretch as well as it could. So if someone has old injuries like that, they might do a little bit more tissue work. For people that I help with femoral acetabular impingement, the FAI stuff, if they're an athlete and they've got this FAI issue or they've got old injuries, I typically put them in the category of needing more self-massage, more tissue work. Whereas sometimes there's people who are hypermobile and hyperflexible who have the same hip issue, and they don't necessarily need to do more stretching if they're already hypermobile and hyperflexible. They actually need strengthening. The strengthening can actually make them, in a weird way, more mobile, because they have, when they're just flexible, they don't have range that they control. They're kind of loosey-goosey. They've been just doing stretching and not enough strengthening. And so that person might need more strengthening and tightening kind of work to have a mobile joint that's also stable. Because if a joint becomes hypermobile and it's unstable, it's painful, and the body will reflexively kind of lock it down, and it can kind of spasm and all of a sudden become immobile because they were too flexible in that joint, too mobile in that joint.
If I didn't, tell you my history as far as injuries, is there anything that I can tell on my own that says, okay, I need to spend more time self-massaging versus more time stretching?
Yeah, if you have access to a foam roller or a lacrosse ball or something, and you just press on your body with that foam roller or that lacrosse ball, if you come across an area which hurts when you press on it, because not all areas of your body will hurt when you press on it. So if you
really
come across that area,
I don't know that you're telling me the truth, because anywhere I press hurts.
Have you rolled out your biceps? Do they hurt?
Yes, every single part of me hurts.
Well, then you probably need to roll
this part right here. Watch, right there on my forehead, no pain.
Grant has a lot of problems.
Wow. Okay, I didn't know that. Yeah, basically, I first heard that quote, I think from Kelly Starrett like 6 years ago. He said, if you press anywhere on your body and it hurts, that means it's not healthy. It's not normal. It's normal to press on an area and it doesn't hurt. And I was like, yeah, fucking right, guy. Like, I don't believe you.
That sounds like bullshit to me. I feel like most of our
bullshit.
Listeners would think that's crazy.
I thought the exact same thing. I was like, that's a bunch of horse shit. And you're just trying to, I don't know, sell me something. But I just was like, all right, whatever. I'm going to set aside that opinion and just try it out. And as I did more and more and more self-massage, I got to the stage where almost nothing hurts when I press on it anymore. Even if I'm using like a barbell or a kettlebell or something that's very unforgiving and not comfortable to press into your body. So it is actually true, believe it or not, that your tissues should not hurt when you press on them.
Okay. This is my unbelieving face. You're saying that you can put a barbell on muscles like your quads or something and it doesn't hurt?
Yes.
Heavy, is he lying to me? Is he just wanting me to buy his programs?
No, I think it's just mastery, man. But I can see it. I still have pain when I put the barbell on me, but I know that it's a lot less than it was the first time I did it. So it's believable. And
it's progressive overload. If you believe in that it's possible for one person to step under a barbell with 200 pounds on it and it's like a joke for them, it's like super light. And for another person, it'll literally crush them. Like my grandma, it would literally crush her. That's because that person who's lifted the barbell thousands of times has trained their body to be able to handle that, while your tissues are no different to pressure and friction.
Well, Shane, I asked you to not call me your grandma when we started this episode, and it's just I wish you didn't bring that up.
Well, based on how you're describing your body, it's pretty similar to my grandma.
You don't even know that happened.
Grant's problems aside here, you have a bunch of application-specific programs on your website, and I'm curious, what are like maybe the two most popular ones? What are the people most often searching for and looking for answers for?
Probably the deep squats program. I feel like a lot of athletes, especially CrossFitters, know. I mean, you squat so much in CrossFit, like front squat, back squat, overhead squat, wall balls, like everything. There's so many squatting movements in CrossFit that I think people are actively searching for help with their squat flexibility. So that's a big one. And then people also know that their shoulders are tight. Right. Either their shoulders outright hurt when they press things overhead or they try to do a handstand or something like that. So the shoulder program is popular. So probably squats and shoulders if I had to pick two.
Okay.
It was crazy. Do you remember our friend Jason? He was, at the time that I was at the gym, one of the best athletes in the gym. Could squat,
couldn't pick his hands
could
up.
Run, could do anything.
Any higher
could
than
not
this.
Could not do a front or an overhead squat with just the barbell.
Yep. I've met guys like that. They're like deadlifting 800 pounds and then like can't overhead squat like, maybe not 800 pounds. That's kind of a lot, but
that's a lot of weight. But
I know he was above 600, if not close to 700. He was a big fucking dude. But when he would go to overhead squat, it was like 135 pounds maybe was his like max, simply because of mobility issues. That's one of those exercises that exposes where mobility actually can make you stronger. Not everything. Like you can deadlift a lot of weight without being that mobile, but you can't overhead squat or snatch a lot of weight without being fairly mobile.
What do you find is the biggest challenge with your clients? Is it simply to get them to do it often?
Yeah, I think that goes for if you're trying to help someone lose weight, if you're trying to, just keeping them motivation and consistency. That it's not a problem for the people that I help with FAI, because usually they're in a lot of pain. And like we've been talking about, pain is a powerful motivator. So they're willing to put in, if I told them to do 2 hours a day, they would. I don't actually recommend that much. I usually say, 30 to 60 minutes. But yeah, I mean, it depends on, how much pain someone is in but probably the hardest thing to get people to do is the consistency, just getting them to make it a habit in their life.
Shane, before we started recording this episode, you told Brandon and I that you were about to visit Southeast Asia.
Mm-hmm.
That sounds like a really exciting trip. How did you plan that?
I've been wanting to do like some long-term world travel for a long time. And I also got into meditation in the past 5 years or so. And Asia is kind of a very Buddhist, meditative kind of land. And so I wanted to visit and go to a couple meditation centers and just travel. And I don't know, just the culture's always kind of spoken to me more than other parts of the world. So I'm going to do a little international vagabonding for a little while.
When are you going to be back?
I have plans to travel until the end of the year and then reevaluate at that point. So a couple of months of kind of working and traveling abroad.
Well, I got to tell you, I'm envious of that. That sounds like an amazing journey. I hope that we can hear back from you to hear how it went.
Yeah.
And we thank you very much for the time. We hope everyone checks out GotRom.com. Especially athletes looking for specific help. But it sounds like you got a lot to offer, even for people like myself who sit at a desk all the time.
Yeah, and maybe when you get back, we can chat again about hip impingement specifically, because I know you've got a lot to offer there.
Yeah, that's the most personal thing that I was talking about that I dealt with, the FAI, the hip impingement, and yeah, it's definitely a topic near and dear to my heart.
If we're getting really personal and near and dear to our hearts, Brandon, I could really go into more detail about the self-massage.
We'll
take that one.
Yeah, we'll take that one offline. You and I will talk about it after.
Again?
Yeah. All right, guys. Sharing too much information now.
Shane, thank you for your time. It was a pleasure to meet you and to chat with you. Cheers, fellas.
Well,
cheers, guys.
Yeah.